you wake in a world long after the breath of gods has left it. Ash clings to your robes like ancient vows. The ground beneath you, once verdant with the rot and bloom of old Sith worlds, now bears only ruin. Something in the silence calls to you, not a voice, but a hunger. It isn't yours alone. It is the echo of 10,000 Sith who spoke too loud and died too soon. You are not one of them. You are the flame they failed to become. The air smells of scorched temples and sunken ambition. You walk through broken pillars, the remains of Korriban's jealous cradle, and you remember not through words, but through the marrow of your bones, that this path has no footsteps before you. Only bones, only betrayal. They were too many. That was their sin. The Brotherhood of Darkness. How poetic, how flawed. A council of whispers with no throne. Power divided, diluted, spilled into 1,000 hands too weak to hold it. Their lightsabers were sharp, but their wills were soft. They fought not for conquest, but for consensus. And so they died. But you sharpened your fury in solitude. You studied the old texts, not to worship them, but to question them. Not to mimic, but to destroy and reshape. You were once day, born to miners and chained to fate. But fate made a mistake. It called you to war, and in war you unlearned weakness. On the front lines, beneath the weight of Republic bombardments and Sith failure, you discovered clarity, that only through pain does the dark side speak clearly. That power should not be shared like alms, but hoarded like fire. You fled there. Ranks, not to retreat, but to become. Alone, you wandered the catacombs of forgotten Sith tombs. You ate from the mouths of ghosts. You listened to the madness of centuries, carved into stone. Korriban taught you what they would not, that there must only be two. The rule did not come to you as a doctrine. It came as a whisper from the dark. One, to embody power. One, to crave it. You are the former, and somewhere beyond this ash and ruin, there will be the latter, but not yet. First, you must become death to what came before. You remember the faces of the Brotherhood, proud and arrogant. How they gathered on Ruusan to end the war with a lie of unity. They spoke of balance, of shared strength. They had no spine for truth. You knew what had to be done. So you sought the ultimate in not their negotiation, but their extinction. The thought bomb, it was not invention, it was reclamation, a forgotten ritual, terrible and pure. You did not create it. You merely remembered it, as if you were its final architect returned. You gave them their wish, unity, in obliteration, their essence torn into a screaming vortex, not slain but unmade. Their souls are still there, trapped in that broken world, a monument to their cowardice. You walk away from Ruusan alone, not triumphant but necessary. The Sith are dead, and you are their gravekeeper. The Republic will think they have one. The Jedi will declare peace, but they do not understand. The darkness does not die. It simplifies. In a cave somewhere, far from this battlefield, you begin again. No banners, no armies, just the rule, just the whisper of legacy yet to be born. There is no applause, no witness, only silence, and the echo of power finding a new form. You sit beneath the stars and begin to write it down, not as prophecy, as law. There will be two, no more, no less, and when the apprentice is worthy, they will kill you, and that death will be the highest proof of your truth. but for now, the world is Ashdod, and you are the flame walking through it. You descend deeper into the earth, not with footsteps, but with purpose. For the cave where you now dwell does not lead outward, burrows inward, toward the core of something ancient and true. And each breath you draw tastes of stone and memory, as if the very walls whisper back your name in forgotten Sith tongues. This is not exile, is incubation, and here, beneath layers of time and ruin, you begin to unmake the galaxy in your thoughts before remaking it in your design. For the Brotherhood's ideology did not rot because it was dark, it failed because it was disordered, fractured, arrogant in its abundance, and you, the last echo of their collapse, feel the truth, not in theory, but in your marrow, that power cannot be divided and remain sacred. It must be distilled, devoured, and passed, like flame from one torch to another. Never shared, never weakened, never paused, and so you carve your creed into stone. Not for others to read, but for the Force to remember, as if you were speaking directly into its endless current, declaring your presence not as a servant of darkness, but as its architect, its purifier, its only worthy host. You dream now, not in sleep, but in trance. And these visions are not symbols, but instructions, worlds burning clean, hierarchies crumbling beneath a single will, the old orders cracking like porcelain beneath the weight of intention. You see, not just the Jedi's failure, but the Sith's betrayal of themselves. And in this illumination, you begin to redefine what darkness is: not chaos, not cruelty, but clarity sharpened to a knife's edge. And with this blade, you begin to shape your legacy in secret, far from eyes that might distort it with fear or reverence. The days do not pass as days, for you have left time behind. There is only before and after, and you reside in the space in between, a fulcrum upon which the future will one day pivot. And in this stillness, you summon the holocrons of dead masters, and listen, not as a student, but as a judge, rejecting their platitudes, consuming only the essence of what they knew, and leaving behind their egos like dust on the floor. Darth Revan's whisper comes to you like a current beneath your skin, and you do not worship it to extract from it the bones of a new doctrine, stripping away weakness until only the law remains. There must be two, for only then can power pass untainted by rivalry or compromise. Only then can the dark side rise without splintering beneath its own weight. You see now that death is not the enemy of power, it is its proving ground, and survival is not strength unless it is earned through conflict, through betrayal, through ascent. So you set this truth within yourself like a second heart, and it beats louder than your own pulse. When the apprentice rises, the master must fall, and only then can the Sith endure, not as a cult, not as a council, but as a lineage of fire. And in the silence of your cave, you sense the future folding toward you. Feel the inevitability of your echo moving through generations, yet unborn. And you know that this isolation is not punishment, it is refinement. And when the time comes to choose your successor, it will not be done with sentiment, but with instinct. For the Force itself will draw them to you, not as a child of fate, but as a blade hungry for a hand. And as you meditate in the dark, you begin to build more than philosophy. You begin to build trials, designs, contingencies, lessons carved not into tablets, but into lives, so that the rule may not merely be remembered, will be endured, lived, proven again and again in the only way that matters, through death, through victory, through sacrifice. And so the nights pass without moonlight, and you feel no need for stars. For you have become your own constellation, your own guiding fire. And the voice within you no longer asks for meaning, it speaks it, calmly, like a river remembering its shape after drought. And the universe listens, even if it does not yet know it. The Jedi look outward, guarding temples, counting relics, clinging to illusions of peace, while their own silence invites war. But your vision is inward, beneath the skin of reality, where truth waits unspoken. And in that chamber, you light a fire the galaxy will not see for 100 years, but it will feel its warmth or its scorch. And in that stillness, you smile, not from pride but recognition, because for the first time since the Sith were born, the darkness has direction, again, not chaos, not vengeance, but precision, inheritance, and purpose sharpened into inevitability. The war is not over, it is reborn within you, quiet and patient, and when it emerges, it will not look like an army, it will look like a shadow and a whisper, a master and an apprentice, a secret passed through blood and betrayal and triumph. And so you wait, not in stillness, but in preparation, as if every breath you take carves one more step toward destiny. And you know that you will not be remembered kindly, nor should you be. For kindness is not the fruit of truth, and your legacy will not be ink in scrolls, but fire in veins. And when the rule of two takes hold, the galaxy will not understand it, but it will kneel to it all the same. You rise from the cave not as a man, but as a verdict, cloaked in silence and shaped by solitude, and the stars above you seem smaller now, not because the sky has changed, but because you no longer look upward for permission. For you have touched something beneath all things, and now the galaxy must bend toward what you've become. There is no ceremony, no coronation, no order to affirm your path, only the cold wind that brushes against your robes as you step into a world still convinced it is safe, still unaware that a new lineage has begun beneath their notice, one without temples, without banners, without weakness. You move through systems and shadows like a rumor, gathering what is needed and discarding what is not, your presence carving a quiet wound in the fabric of the Force. And though your lightsaber remains at your side, it is not your weapon. Your will is honed through pain and isolation into something more enduring than steel. And then one day you find her not by fate but by gravity, for the rule draws its own successors, and she is small and fierce, broken but unyielding, a blade yet to be sharpened. And in her eyes you see not innocence, but fury disguised as fragility. The same hunger you once buried beneath the name Day. She does not know you are her beginning, nor that she will one day be your end. But that is as it must be. For the rule is not a lesson, it is a rhythm, a cycle of growth through destruction. And when you speak to her, it is not as a father or savior, but as the whisper of destiny that cannot be denied. She becomes your apprentice, and with her, the rule of two lives, not in parchment or monument, but in breath and blade. In every strike she survives. In every truth she learns to question, and as you train her, you see yourself reborn through inversion where you were forged in isolation. She sharpens through your scrutiny, and where you tore down the brotherhood with force, she will dissolve enemies with precision, subtle and patient, and in her rise you feel both triumph and the distant shadow of your own fall. But you do not flinch, For this is the truth you carved into the foundation of your existence, that to preserve the Sith, the Master must eventually die not in failure, but in fulfillment. And when that moment comes, when the apprentice no longer craves your guidance, but your place, you will not resist, for resistance would make the rule a lie. Until then, you teach her what the old Sith forgot, that power is not a possession, but a current, and only those strong enough to let it move through them can become more than vessels, they become storms. You lead her through ruins and rituals, through the holocrons of liars and the tombs of cowards, and you make her listen, not with reverence, but with teeth, until she no longer seeks permission to act, only purpose. And when you see that fire burn in her eyes, you know the future is no longer a question. It. Years pass, not as seasons, but as scars, and the galaxy continues its blind march toward illusion. Jedi proclaiming peace from thrones of static decay, unaware that a new truth walks beneath their feet, dressed not in armor, but in intention. And you watch from afar, smiling not with joy, but with certainty, because your creed was never about conquest, it was about survival, continuity, the perfect passing of a flame too sacred to be shared by many. And when the galaxy finally turns its eyes toward the dark once more, it will not find a horde, it will find a pair, silent and inevitable. And in that moment, the rule of two will cease to be a secret and become a storm. And you, though your body may fall, will live on not in memory, but in repetition, in the rise of one and the fall of another. A lineage of fire moving across centuries, clean and cruel and necessary. And so you sit now beneath a sky you no longer fear, your apprentice, sleeping near the coals of your final lesson. And you feel the force breathe around you, not in balance, but in momentum. For balance was always a lie meant to pacify, but momentum, that is the truth of the dark, ever rising, ever breaking, ever birthing the next from the death of the last. And as you close your eyes for the final time, whether tonight or years from now, you do so without regret, for you were not a destroyer, you were a gardener of flame, and in your wake the galaxy will burn clean. And through that fire, the Sith will not merely survive, they will endure. You walk the broken surface of Rusin, not as a victor, but as its final observer. And the soil beneath your feet murmurs with the pain of too many souls torn asunder by their own ambitions, their essence forever trapped in the wound you opened, a wound that now breathes with you, dark and deep, pulsing in rhythm with the philosophy you carry like a second spine. The planet remembers, even as the Jedi erect stone markers to forget, and in that forgetting you find your advantage. For what they bury with prayers and monuments, you dig up with intention, and as you sift through the shattered remnants of both Sith and Jedi alike, you understand the truth that neither order could fully speak, that balance was never pieced with silence between screams. And your purpose now is not to break the silence, but to shape what follows it. You return to this grave, not for grief, but for clarity. And in the twilight hours, when the sun casts no allegiance, you study the way light fades into shadow, the way fire leaves no memory once the ash cools, and you realize that the rule of two is not just a commandment. T is a cycle, a breathing, pulsing certainty that corrects the failures of the past through singular focus. And as you kneel beside what once was the mouth of the thought bomb, you do not mourn those you destroyed, you absolve them, For their death was a baptism through which your doctrine could be born uncorrupted. Here, beneath the cracked bones of monuments and melted sabers, you begin to refine the rule not as law, but as a living organism, fed by ambition and sharpened by betrayal. And every night you spend among these ruins is not in retreat, but in transcription, writing not with ink, but with presence, letting the force etch itself through you like wind shaping cliffside. And it whispers truths the old Sith ignored, that immortality is not in flesh, but in philosophy that demands its own renewal through violence. You become the doctrine not through proclamation, but through the ceaseless work of dying to old visions, stripping from your mind every trace of the Brotherhood's failure, every compromise they mistook for unity, until you are nothing but will wrapped in skin. And that will now has a name, BANE, cut from the roots of the galaxy's decay and sharpened into the instrument of its next becoming. You do not teach the rule yet, for it is not finished. Skeleton exists, but its marrow must be harvested from trial, from sacrifice, from silence so complete it becomes scripture. And you let it grow inside you like a second tongue, one that speaks not to crowds but to fate, and fate listens. Because you are no longer asking for power, you are designing its future shape. And even as the Jedi proclaim their hollow victory, you move through the undercurrents of history unseen, watching their order drift back into complacency. Their temples rebuilt upon the lie that light has triumphed. But you know better. You see the rot they refuse to name, the cracks beneath their golden thresholds. And you smile not with cruelty, but with patience, for time is now your most loyal apprentice. And in its flow you plant seeds of thought, careful and quiet, designing a lineage that will carry your will long after your voice is gone. You do not need armies, only echoes, and so you leave no trail, no manifesto, only the rule, repeated to yourself beneath your breath like a prayer reversed, a ritual in solitude, one to embody power, one to crave it, and with every repetition, it becomes truer, sharper, until it begins to move through the force itself, like a tide reshaping shorelines unseen, until even the Jedi begin to feel unease in their meditations. A tremor they cannot name, because it is not fear, it is premonition. And you, alone among the ruins, understand that the rule will not be understood until it is too late to resist. And that is its perfection, that it does not demand belief, only survival. And in that survival, it becomes divine. So you close your eyes beside the crater where empires ended, and you do not grieve. For grief is for those who lack vision. You dream instead, and in that dream the Sith are not many, not loud, not proud. They are a line drawn so finely it cuts through centuries, a whisper that kills a legacy that can only be earned in blood. And you, the last flame, have now become its voice. You wander not through space, but through intention, your presence, moving across forgotten sectors like a draft through sealed tombs, disturbing nothing and yet altering everything. And as you pass, no one marks your name, for the galaxy has already begun to erase you from its active memory. Darth Bane, the phantom, the relic of a war no one wants to remember. But you smile beneath your hood, because erasure is not death, it is stealth. And from the silence of their forgetting, you begin to build something more enduring than conquest, a doctrine not of empire, but of inevitability. Each world you visit offers not sanctuary but reflection. And in their ruins, you see how civilizations decay when too many voices cry for the same throne. How power, when diluted, becomes a chorus of weakness. And so you refine your rule, shaping it not as law, but as nature's correction and instinct encoded into ambition, one that will repeat itself without need of scripture. As long as its rhythm is obeyed, one must hold power, one must desire it, and between them must stretch the razor-thin line where the Sith are reborn. And so you return to your cave between journeys, not for comfort, but calibration, etching fragments of strategy into stone, into memory, into the blood of your own discipline. And each time you meditate, you do not seek clarity, you enforce it, bending the force inward, sharpening it around your will until your presence becomes a scar on reality itself, a pressure in the dark that even distant Jedi shiver at without knowing why. The doctrine grows teeth, not through followers, but through form, and you begin to see that legacy must not be trusted to the multitude, must be passed like venom, drop by drop, until the apprentice becomes stronger, not in loyalty, but in hunger. And when the day comes that your apprentice looks at you not with reverence, but with calculation, you will know the rule has taken root, because reverence breeds stagnation, and stagnation is the true death of the Sith. You travel to ancient sites not as pilgrim, but as thief, robbing graves of meaning, unlearning what others revered, and you find in the temples of Zeal, in the catacombs of Malachor, in the wind-swept ruins of Dramond Kaz, not knowledge, but warning, echoes of pride mistaken for permanence, teachings wrapped in ritual too thick to breathe. And you strip these relics of their vanity, absorbing only the marrow of their truths, that the Sith survived not because they were many, but because they were cunning, not because they built monuments, but because they adapted, and you alone are that adaptation given form. You do not plan an army, you cultivate an idea, and you begin to see yourself not as the first of a new line, but as the prototype of an eternal engine, every master destined to be surpassed, every apprentice destined to transcend or die trying. And you know the rule is not about trust or legacy or even survival, it is about focus, a discipline so absolute that it will purify the Sith of every flaw that bloated it through the centuries. And still you wait, not idly, but like a blade kept just beneath the skin, because the galaxy is not yet ready to feel you again, but it will. And when it does, it will not see a man, it will feel a pattern rising through the dark, a tremor, passed down through blood and betrayal and trial. You begin designing not just the future apprentice, but the conditions by which they will become worthy tests of cruelty, of deception, of restraint. For power without suffering is theater, and the Sith are not performers. They are storms that choose when and where to break the sky. And in these meditations, you hear whispers, not just from the Force, but from something deeper, from the shape of legacy itself, murmuring back that what you have set in motion will not end, even when you are nothing but dust be, because it is supple, brutal, elegant, and truths such as these do not need monuments, only momentum. You return to the world in brief shadows, glimpsing the galaxy as it rebuilds its illusions. Republic halls filled with new bureaucrats, Jedi temples echoing with children trained to deny themselves, and you see it all as glass ready to crack because they believe you gone, defeated, absorbed into history, but they have not yet met the apprentice who will carry your breath in her lungs and your will in her strikes. And you know she waits, though she does not yet know you, and that she will not come through prophecy, but through confrontation. And when you find her, the rule will become flesh, not scripture. And still, in the quiet between footsteps, you polish the edge of your philosophy, making it cleaner, sharper, stripping even your own doubts, until the rule is not just your idea, is your identity, your final mask, your final weapon. And when others speak of the Sith in years to come, they will not speak of numbers or orders or armies. They will speak of lines traced through time, of conflict as inheritance, of strength forged not by coalition but by trial. And in that telling, whether they honor it or curse it, you will live, not as legend, but as the law beneath all dark ambition. And so you walk on, silent and unseen, carving your name into no stone, placing it into no archives, letting the galaxy forget your face. Because remembrance is not your goal, repetition is, continuation is, the next and the next and the next, one to embody, one to crave, until the Sith are no longer a species, a religion, a cult, but a rhythm of the Force itself, invisible and inevitable, rising in twos, burning in silence, and surviving through death. You watch the horizon not for threats, but for echoes, for you have become so still that even the Force curves gently around your will, recognizing in you not a presence but a principle. And though stars rise and empires shift, you remain anchored in something deeper than time. The truth that all power, when spread too thin, becomes dust, and all legacy, when passed too widely, becomes myth without structure. And so you remain in the shadows, not as a coward, but as the doctrine itself, walking in skin. And each breath you take is a reminder that you do not seek eternity in flesh, only in rhythm. And your rhythm now pulses through the dark like a heartbeat beneath stone, slow and steady, unseen but undeniable. You feel her approaching, not physically, not yet, but like a pattern forming at the edge of a storm, the one who will be your apprentice, the one who must crave what you possess, not out of worship, but out of need, out of defiance, out of the same hunger that once cracked your ribs open and whispered that you were more than what the Brotherhood allowed you to be. And when she comes, she will not kneel out of tradition, but because the rule has called her through the marrow of time. And you will test her, not with lessons, but with crucible, because doctrine cannot be explained, only endured. And you will shape her through wounds and revelation, through silence and pressure, until she either becomes the vessel of your death or the victim of her own hesitation. For that is the final purity of the rule, that it demands from each apprentice not loyalty, but consequence. Only the bare essentials philosophies, encoded like poison into glass, keys locked in puzzles, only the worthy can solve teachings buried beneath pain and silence, so that even if your voice is lost, your will shall filter forward through the sharpest minds, the most dangerous hearts. You see it now, the distant galaxy still spinning, still pretending its peace is permanent, its republic immortal, its Jedi immune to entropy. But you know better, because you have felt the tremors in the Force, the way light dulls its own blade in fear of extremity, while darkness sharpens itself without apology. And so your final days are not spent in desperation, but in meditation, weaving the last threads of your doctrine into the weave of the Force itself, so that even long after your name fades, the rule will echo beneath the breath of every apprentice who dares to strike, every master who dares to fall with dignity. Your doctrine is not a book to be read, is a pattern to be lived, and its truth is this, that through to read, the Sith may cleanse themselves of weakness, and that through death, the Master ensures the strength of what comes next. And as she finally stands before Usana, child of chaos, survivor of war, echo of your own fury, you do not tell her what she is meant to become. You show her, again and again, in blade and word and silence, that she is to surpass you, or die trying, and that this test is not cruelty, but devotion to the Order's survival. And over years, you see her sharpen, see her shift, see her learn not from your teaching, but from your example. And in her questions, you hear the approaching footsteps of your own end. And in her ambition, you feel the comfort of completion. For you were never meant to live forever. You were meant to ignite something that could not die. And so, when the moment comes, when she rises, not just in skill but in will, and looks at you not as a mentor but as an obstacle, you do not plead, you provoke, you test, you wait. And when her blade finally answers your last question, when your heart stills beneath the precision you once demanded, you do not feel loss, you feel arrival. Your death is not an end, it is the rule's proof, and as your body fades into legends, your will travels forward in her bones, your flame relit in another vessel, and you become not memory, but motion. Years will pass, centuries perhaps, and they will say the Sith vanished again, that the rule was myth or exaggeration, but they will not see the line beneath history, the thread pulled tight beneath the surface. One apprentice, one master, one death, one rebirth, and in this quiet lineage you will continue not as a face, not as a name, but as the whisper every Sith hears when they dream of power alone in the dark, one to embody it, one to crave it. And when they wake, they will not know your name, but they will follow you, because they are you, and you were always them. And the rule is not a lot, is the heartbeat of the dark. You do not remember the moment it began, because beginnings are not moments, they are fractures, quiet fault lines beneath the skin of certainty that split wider with each unspoken truth. And as you wandered through the aftermath of Rusan, through the ashes of the Brotherhood and the blind prayers of the Jedi, you felt it not as a thought, but as a pulse in your bones. The rule must not merely be spoken, it must be forged in fire and silence, pressed into the soul like iron against anvil, again and again, until it becomes not doctrine but instinct, something deeper than belief, something that burns even when forgotten. And so you shed your name as one peels off old skin, not with regret but with precision. For Day was the corpse from which Bane was born, and Bane was not a man, not anymore. He was a crucible, made to melt centuries of failure into something sharp and singular, and that fire could not be fed with memory or nostalgia. Only clarity, only the raw and merciless heat of purpose. You wandered, not aimlessly, but like a storm circling its center, pulling in knowledge, pain, vision, each encounter, each confrontation tempering the blade of your resolve, until your footsteps carried not the weight of movement, but the gravity of inevitability. You studied the Force not as a student, but as a dissident, a heretic to every creed before you. And you listened not for answers, but for patterns, for rhythms buried beneath centuries of noise. And when you found them hidden in tombs, whispered, in the dead breath of holocrons, you did not obey them. You devoured them, stripped them of ceremony, consumed only the marrow of their power. And in doing so, you began to understand that the Sith had never truly lived, they had only prolonged their death, scattering their ambition into councils and covens, each voice a dilution of the original hunger. And the rule of two was not a rejection of the Sith, it was their resurrection, their purification, their return to the moment when power meant something absolute. And as this understanding crystallized within you, it did not fill you, it hollowed you out, made space for the rule to live inside you, to breathe with you, so that every thought you had, every action you took, became an extension of its shape. One must embody power, one must crave it not as a slogan, but as the foundation of all growth, all survival, all evolution. You lived with this fire inside you like a second spine, silent and unshakable, and it changed how you walked, how you saw, how you dreamed. And it began to whisper that your legacy could not be carried by mere ideas, it must be tested, bloodied, proven again and again, through challenge, through failure, through death. And so you sought not allies, but challenges, not disciples, but threats, and each one you overcame did not make you arrogant, it made you precise, reminded you that survival was not enough unless it carried forward the rule in stronger form. And this understanding became your compass, guiding you through forgotten moons and haunted temples, each one offering not glory, but resistance, not reward, but refinement. And in this relentless self-forging, you began to see that the rule would only endure if it became more than words. It had to be a hunger so clear, so elegant, that every apprentice who tasted it would either rise sharper or perish, and both outcomes would serve the rule. You crafted it not as a philosophy to teach, but as a trap to survive. And when you finally began to whisper it aloud, into the ear of a trembling pupil, or the edge of a blade, it did not sound like wisdom, it sounded like prophecy, like a truth the galaxy had always known but feared to speak, that strength cannot be inherited by decree, only seized through fire. And now, with every breath, you feel that fire deepen in your chest. And you know that you are no longer a man with a vision, you are the vision itself, wrapped in flesh for a time, but destined to outlast yourself in the echoes of what you've set in motion. And though the stars above you shine indifferent, and the Jedi meditate in their light-blind halls, you feel no need to correct them, because they are not your concern. They are the scaffolding that will collapse when your rule matures, the noise that will fall silent when your whisper becomes a storm. And so you walk still, quieter now, but heavier, your shadow no longer following you but leading. And beneath your skin the darkness does not sleep, waits, coiled and patient, because it knows the truth you now embody, that for the Sith to endure, the darkness must inherit itself. You begin to sense the shift, not in the galaxy around you, but in the stillness within the moment when your thoughts cease to question and instead begin to echo. When the rule no longer sits in your mind like a fire you tend, but becomes the very shape of your breath, the rhythm beneath your bones, and you realize this is the final phase of creation, not conception, not proclamation, but embodiment. And with that embodiment comes the burden of transference, the necessity that this fire not end in you, but burn brighter in another. And so you begin your search, not as a seeker, but as a blacksmith, looking for raw, or flawed, and unrefined, but capable of holding heat, capable of being hammered into form. You do not look for a student, you look for your death, because that is the contract the rule demands, that every master not only trains an heir, but forges the blade that will one day pierce them, and in that act proves the rule worthy of survival. For if the apprentice does not become strong enough to kill the master, then the doctrine fails, and weakness takes root again. You understand this, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Because you did not craft the rule to prolong yourself, you crafted it to cleanse, to preserve the power of the Sith through generations of precision and pain, and in your meditations. You begin to feel the tremors of possibility ripple through the Force, the subtle pull toward someone not yet shaped, someone fractured, half buried in their own fury. And you follow that pull like a river drawn toward the sea, trusting not in prophecy, but in instinct sharpened by silence. And what you find is not a warrior, not yet, but a child of ruins, Anna, surrounded by death, her village burned, her spirit trembling, not from fear, but from the raw overwhelm of potential that has not yet found its vessel. And in her eyes you do not see innocence, you see recursion, you see yourself, not mirrored, but reimagined. And so you take her not with kindness, but with clarity, and you say nothing of destiny, nothing of salvation. You only teach her how to see the world for what it is, a chain to break, a lie to rewrite, a battlefield disguised as peace. And as she walks beside you, she does not cling, she watches, learns, questions in silence, and you recognize that the rule is already working through her, already adapting itself to a new form, one shaped not by your design, but by her divergence, her particular cruelty, her elegance of thought. And you do not resist this, you encourage it, because the rule must not be a mirror of the master, but a refinement, a recursion that evolves each time through flame and fracture. And Xana becomes that evolution, slowly at first, then with accelerating hunger. Each lesson you give her, not a gift, but a challenge. Each test, not to impart knowledge, but to see if she will choose the blade over the book, silence over comfort, strength over mercy. And she does, again and again, and you begin to feel something unfamiliar, not pride, not affection, but certainty, the kind that settles into the joints like winter air, quiet and permanent. And you know now that your death will not be a failure, but a flowering, the moment the rule confirms itself by ending you. But not yet, she is not ready, and so you continue to sharpen her, not only with power but with doubt, with delays, with distance, because the rule must be earned, and only in struggle does the apprentice rise beyond shadow into fire. You take her to the tombs of forgotten Sith and let her speak with their madness. You pit her against enemies, not for victory, but for loss, because how she bleeds matters more than how she kills. And each time she falters, you do not correct her, you watch her correct herself, and in that correction, you see the rule, learning, adapting, deepening its roots in her spine the same way it once did in yours. And you wonder, sometimes in silence, if this is what Revan felt when he touched the edge of true clarity, the moment when ideology ceases to be spoken and becomes lived, when philosophy becomes pulsant. If Revan faltered, if the Brotherhood betrayed that pulse, then your doctrine is their correction, and Xana is your punctuation, the next step in a sentence carved in ash and bone. And so you press forward, guiding her not as a mentor, but as a sculptor, chipping away until the shape beneath emerges fully formed and dangerous. And as the years pass, you notice she no longer waits for instruction, she anticipates, prepares, conceals her true strength even from you, and you do not reprimand her, you admire her, because concealment is strength, misdirection is power. And the fact that she is already thinking beyond you means the rule is nearing its next heartbeat. And still, you do not name a date, do not offer her permission, because the rule does not operate on schedules, it operates on hunger, and when she wants it enough, when she sees you not as necessary but as obstruction, she will act, and you will not stop her. You meditate often now, feeling the galaxy shift in small ways, disputes, uprisings, changes in power structures that seem disconnected but are not, because the dark side moves like underground rivers, shaping lands long before anyone sees the cracks. And you know that when the time is right, Zana will rise, not to avenge you, not to preserve you, but to surpass you, and in doing so, she will become the rule, just as you did, just as every Sith worthy of the title must. And in that cycle, you feel no sorrow, only continuation, only fire moving from torch to torch, a lineage not of blood, but of blade and silence. And as you watch her grow sharper, more subtle, more certain, you prepare yourself not for the end but for fulfillment. You feel it before she moves, like a shift in gravity rather than intent, a subtle withdrawal of deference, so slight it would go unnoticed by any other. But not by you, not by the one who shaped her spine with silence, and her will with war. And though she still walks behind you, speaks when spoken to, listens with the same attentive gaze you once mistook for obedience, you now know better, because she is not waiting for guidance, she is watching for weakness, listening for hesitation, not to correct it, but to claim it. And in that patient calculation, you see the rule completing its arc, folding inward before it bursts outward again. And though your mind remains sharp, your limbs still steady, you know your place in the cycle is no longer to embody it, is to fall, because only in your death will the rule be proven. Only through your end will its rhythm be restored. And so you begin to move slower, not out of fear, but out of reverence, aware that each word you speak might be your last to her. Each gaze you exchange a quiet passing of the torch, not through ceremony, but through tension. And though the galaxy turns on without knowledge of what trembles beneath its surface, you walk through it like a shadow, preparing to dissolve, watching your apprentice, not with pride, but with precision, measuring the readiness not of her strength, but of her hunger. And it is there, in her restraint, in her composure, in the way she now disagrees without speaking, that you recognize she has already made her decision, not in haste, but in conviction. And you test her one final time, not with a duel or command, but with uncertainty. You create gaps in your logic, offer flaws in your strategy, feign distraction in meditation, and she does not correct you, she does not strike, but she marks each moment like a scribe preparing a history yet to be written. And when she finally comes for you, it is not under cover of darkness, but in full awareness. And the confrontation is not a battle, but a conclusion, the inevitable exhale of a breath you both have held for years. Your blades clash not with rage, but with clarity, every motion an echo of the same doctrine you carved in silence. Every strike a verse in the song only the Sith can hear, the rhythm of inheritance, the language of pain, the vow of strength passed through fire. And though you match her move for move, you know even in victory you would have lost. Because the rule is not about dominance, it is about succession. And if she fails to kill you, then she is not worthy to continue it. And so when her blade finally slips past your guard, when your vision narrows into shadow and breath escapes your lungs, not in despair, but in release, you do not resist, because death is not defeat, is the proof of what you forged. And in the silence that follows, you feel no fear, only fulfillment. For she does not weep, she does not pause, she does not bury you or carve your name into stone. She walks away, as you once did, with nothing but the rule etched behind her eyes and the galaxy before her. And in that moment, you are more than a man, more than a master. You are the rhythm continuing, the silence breaking, the fire passing into its next shape. And though your body falls, your legacy rises, not in temples or legends, but in the breath of every apprentice yet to come, each one destined to become either the grave or the birth of the next. And this is the purity of the rule that it requires. Nothing but itself to survive, no counsel, no order, only the will to surpass and be surpassed, again and again, through centuries of darkness unbroken. And as your last thoughts fade into that cold but sacred final stillness, you do not reach for hope or redemption or peace. You reach only for the truth you carried since the first ash touched your boot. That power must be earned in solitude, passed in silence, and proven in death. And now that it has been, you are not GNU, are inherited by her and all who come after. By every hand that lifts a saber in ambition, every voice that whispers doctrine in the dark, every flame that remembers where it came from, and in that eternal inheritance, you are not a story, you are the rule itself. Pulsing forever beneath the skin of the Sith, you find her not with prophecy, but with instinct, drawn through the dark, like a current beneath still water, pulled toward something broken but sharp, raw but waiting. And when you arrive at the smoking ruins of the Gloomwalkers' massacre, the child stands untouched amid ash and blood, her face streaked not with tears, but with defiance, her eyes too quiet for her age, too calculating. And you know, without needing confirmation, that this is no accident. This is the Force speaking back to you, not in words, but in consequence, in symmetry. Because where you were forged from the pain of the mines, she has been born in the detonation of war, her life already cracked by betrayal, her innocence already peeled back to reveal something cold, clean, and feral. She is small, but her silence is vast, and you see it immediately that this child does not look for safety, she looks for control. And where others would cower or collapse, she observes, internalizes, and waits. And in that waiting you see the embryo of strength, the beginning of the next vessel. And you do not speak to her as a savior. You do not lower yourself to comfort her, because the rule is not a promise, it is a filter, and she must walk through its fire on her own. And so you offer her nothing but your presence, your shadow stretching long across the scorched dirt as she studies you without fear, without reverence. And the moment she chooses to walk toward you, not as a plea but as a statement, the decision is made not yours but hers. Because this is how it must begin, not with indoctrination, but with will. You take her from that place, not to heal her, but to test her, and your ship becomes a crucible. Its silence loud, its air thick with unspoken challenge, and she asks no questions, makes no complaints, but watches everything, your movements, your rituals, your meditations, and you see the thoughts forming behind her stillness, like a blade cooling before its first strike. You bring her to worlds that bend the mind and fracture the soul. You expose her to tombs where the walls still bleed with the screams of Sith too arrogant to listen, and she listens, not with awe, but with calibration, adjusting her understanding, as if her mind were a construct being reassembled with each step. And this is what confirms it. For you, she does not inherit your teachings like scripture. She devours them like code, rewriting herself with each lesson, each sparring wound, each test of loyalty disguised as sabotage. And you begin to mold her, not as a daughter, but as a successor, crafting her through deliberate neglect, precise cruelty, pointed silence, knowing that the rule does not allow sentiment, because sentiment slows the blade that must one day strike you down, and if she cannot kill you without hesitation, she will not be worthy to carry what you've built. And she grows, not in obedience, but in precision, and with every passing day, her eyes reveal less, her presence sharpens, and her questions, rare, though they are cut deeper than any saber, aimed not at your actions, but at your motives, at the gaps in your logic. And though she never accuses, never challenges outright, you begin to feel the tremor that signals the rule is taking root, that the apprentice no longer sees the master as shelter, but as the final obstacle. And still you push her further, sending her into trials designed not to teach, but to tempt power offered too soon, allies presented only to betray her, victory that arrives tainted by loss, and through it all she remains unshaken, scarred, but not broken, shaped, but not shackled. And you begin to recognize in her what the galaxy will never understand, that strength is not in force alone, but in restraint sharpened to a knife's edge. And she learns this not because you told her, but because she watched you, how you speak little, how you strike rarely, how you hide in plain sight, while shifting the future beneath your feet. And she mirrors this, not out of mimicry, but out of necessity. And you begin to wonder quietly, without voice, if she already sees your ending, if she is already planning the moment when her shadow will finally overtake yours. But you do not fear it, because that is the rule's purity. It does not allow attachment, only succession, and your survival depends not on keeping her close, but on making her independent enough to leave you behind with certainty. And now, as you watch her meditate with closed eyes and a stillness deeper than sleep, you feel the force move through her like it once moved through you, not a storm, but a tide, steady, unrelenting, claiming everything in its path. And you understand that this is no longer a beginning, this is the transmission of fire. The moment when your legacy begins to loosen from your grasp and coil itself into hers, not in ceremony, but in consequence, and you allow yourself one moment of stillness, not as pride, but as acknowledgement, because soon, very soon, you will not be needed, not as guide, not as teacher, not even as opponent hand. In that knowledge, the rule confirms itself, whispering again in the marrow of your bones that there will only ever be two, and when the second becomes first, the flame is preserved. She does not ask for your approval, and that is how you know she is becoming ready. Because the apprentice who still craves the master's gaze has not yet shed the skin of dependency. and Zana has long stopped looking to you for anything but obstacle. And you feel it growing between you, not hatred, not rivalry, but a sacred tension. A silence that thickens with each mission she completes, each manipulation she orchestrates, each secret she keeps from you, because she no longer needs your permission to shape her power. And this is not betrayal, it is design. It is the echo of your teachings reverberating within her. Proof that the rule of two has sunk into her marrow and made a home there. And now you watch as she moves through the galaxy like a shadow cast by your own legacy, yet not bound to it, different in style, but not in purpose. And she does not conquer with brute strengths. She corrupts, she destabilizes, she subverts, using diplomacy like venom and silence like a saber. And you realize she has taken everything you taught and turned it inward, refined it, evolved it, and where your fire burned hot, hers coils like smoke through closed doors, invisible until the structure collapses. And it is in this contrast that the rule proves itself once more, not through replication, but through transformation, because sameness is stagnation, and she is not your mirror, she is your successor. And still you test her, not with blade or command, but with gaps, with lies, with shifting truths, watching how she responds, not to combat, but to complexity. And each time she answers with subtlety, with restraint, with timing so precise it borders on clairvoyant. And though she never names herself your equal, you can feel her certainty rising, the quiet recognition in her presence that your death is not a possibility, is an eventuality. And the moment it becomes necessary, she will act. And when she does, it will not be a murder, it will be a right. You no longer speak of destiny or doctrine, because it is no longer necessary. Everything that must be said has already been encoded into her, through scars, through silence, through shared breath in dark halls and forgotten temples. And now, when you meditate, you find your thoughts drifting not to the future, but to the moment of transference, to the strike that will end your breath but extend your will. And this thought does not frighten you, it completes you, because you have never feared death, only insignificance. And Zana is proof that you will endure, that your philosophy has moved from being spoken to being lived. And as you watch her now quiet, calculating, her mind already weaving futures without you feel a calm settle over your limbs like dusk, and you know the rule is no longer just alive in her. It is maturing, preparing to molt again, to move forward as it always must, one flame extinguished, another burning brighter. You recall your own path not with nostalgia, but with reflection, how you walked from the mines to the battlefield, from solitude to supremacy, and you realize that she too has walked her own corridor of pain, her own crucible, and emerged, not as an echo of you, but as a blade you never could have forged alone. And that is the rule's brilliance, that it uses the master not as a teacher, but as a whetstone, sharpening the apprentice until the only thing left for the master to give is their death. And so you begin to prepare, not by defending, but by observing, by removing excess, by letting your presence grow lighter in her days, so that she can begin to carry the darkness without leaning on its origin. And she notices, though she says nothing. And that is how you know she is watching too, calculating the moment, adjusting her timing. And each time your gazes meet in the quiet corridors of your hidden stronghold, there is no warmth, only measurement. And that is sacred, that is correct. And when the galaxy whispers of Sith sightings, of unknown actors dismantling planetary networks, or influencing weak senators behind closed doors, you do not claim them, you do not intervene, because that is Xana's work now. And your role is no longer to lead, but to step aside when the blade rises. And the closer that moment comes, the more you feel your body respond, your limbs heavier, your thoughts more finite, your instincts quieter, not from decay, but from completion, like a ritual reaching its final chant. And you do not cling, you do not retreat, you do not plead for more time, because time was always the illusion the Jedi worshipped, and you worship only the rule, the cycle, the truth that every master must sculpt their own destruction and celebrate it. And still the galaxy turns, oblivious to the lineage unfolding beneath its feet. And that is how it must be. This order was never meant to be seen, only felt, a tremor before collapse, a whisper before fire. And Xana is becoming that whisper, that silence before the storm, and you are content now to watch her move through that transformation without interference, to feel her confidence deepen and harden like a final spell. And when she finally begins to plan your death not as rebellion, but as succession, you will know. And when the blow comes, it will not be punishment, it will be passage. And she will not cry, and you will not resist. And in that sacred moment, you will give the rule its next breath, even as you release your own dot. It happens without warning, yet not without preparation. Because the rule never announces itself, it arrives in silence, dressed in inevitability, and when it finally comes, it feels less like a betrayal and more like a closing door. A breath held too long, finally released, and you sense her intent. Before she moves, not as danger, but as destiny, sharpening its blade against the whetstone of your final hours. She waits until the moment is right, until your defenses are low, not from sloth, but from trust in the rule itself. And as her presence enters the chamber where you meditate, where the stone walls have held your breath through years of solitude and thought, you do not open your eyes, because you already know this is the moment, the one you shaped her for, the one you burned years into her soul to prepare, and you welcome it, not with words, but with stillness, with the quiet dignity of fulfillment. And still she does not strike, not yet, because she is not here to kill you as an act of vengeance or ascension. She is here to confirm that the rule has taken hold, that it has nested in her heart so deeply that even sentiment cannot unseat it. And as the seconds stretch into sacred tension, she speaks your name not as a title, but as a warning. And still, you do not respond, because your life is no longer yours to protect, it is hers to claim, and she must take it with full awareness of what that means. And when the first blow comes, it is fast, merciless, but not reckless, and you rise not in fear, but in answer. Because this is the final lesson, the closing of the circle. And your blades meet not as enemies, but as symbols, as incarnations of a doctrine that demands conflict to verify its truth. And each strike she delivers is sharp with intention, with grief buried beneath resolve. And each counter you offer is not to defeat her, but to ensure she is ready to force her into the fire one last time, to see whether she will flinch, whether her conviction will burn bright enough to end you. And as the duel stretches on, a storm of motion and silence and thought, you feel your own strength begin to ebb, not from exhaustion, but from release. Because you are not holding back, you are guiding her to that final moment, sharpening her. With every clash, every parry, every whispered breath between movements, and when she finally lands the blow, when your knees touch the ground and your saber falls from fingers no longer clenched, you look at her, not with regret, but with the profound stillness of acceptance. Because she does not gloat, does not tremble, she only watches, breathing evenly, eyes burning with clarity. And in that gaze, you see the rule preserved. You do not speak, because there is nothing left to say. She knows it all, carries it all, and your death is not a message, but a seal, the final act that ensures the continuity of the fire. And as darkness folds around you, you feel no fear, because you were never meant to last, only to ignite. And now, as your body begins to fall backward, and her silhouette stands unshaken beneath the flicker of dying torchlight, you vanish not into obscurity, but into rhythm, into the echo that pulses through her, through the rule, through every future master and apprentice who will carve their story in the blood-soaked quiet of the dark side. And she does not weep, she does not pause to memorialize you, because the rule allows no indulgence, only movement. And so she turns from your body before the heat has even left your bones, and walks out into the galaxy with your silence wrapped around her shoulders like a new mantle. And in her steps, the legacy continues, not as reverence, but as function, as survival, as inheritance. And though the stars do not dim to mark your passing, the force itself exhales in balance, restored. One dies, one rises, and the thread pulls tighter. Zana does not speak of you again, not out of denial, but because she does not need to. She becomes you in motion, in decision, in every careful betrayal and every cruel mercy. And she will teach no students, only shape successors, one at a time, as the rule demands. And in this lineage of secrecy and fire, you remain not as memory, but as method, as structure, as breath moving quietly through centuries of Sith. One whisper, always returning to remind the dark who it serves, one to embody power, one to crave it. And when the time comes, that whisper will rise again, will strike again, will pass again. And so your death is not an end, is a breath drawn in by the next. You descend the steps not with hope, but with hunger, your fingers grazing the stone walls of a tomb that predates memory, its silence thicker than shadow, its darkness humming like a forgotten name called from beneath the skin of the galaxy. And each footfall is swallowed by the void, as if the temple itself resents your presence, yet permits it all the same, and you feel it, the weight of centuries pressed into every slab, every etched glyph pulsing faintly with the breath of things that never died, merely waited. And here, deep beneath the crust of Lihan's ruins, in the marrow of ancient collapse, you find the place where thought becomes echo, and echo becomes doctrine, where the holocron of Revan rests not upon a pedestal, but within a cradle of ruin, guarded not by traps, but by time. And when your hands reach for it, you do not flinch, because fear is the language of the weak, and you came not for worship, but for correction. The artifact does not greet you, it awakens to you, light unfolding like a wound in the air, and from its prismed heart, the voice speaks not in sound, but in pressure, a weight against your ribs, a knowing that bypasses comprehension, and suddenly you are not alone. You are surrounded by echoes, by remnants of will so dense they might as well be alive. Revan's presence flickering through form and philosophy, fractured by regret, strengthened by clarity. And though his words are fragmented, layered across, time like shattered reflections. The truth beneath them glows sharp and cold. The Sith failed not because they were wrong, but because they refused to be refined. They diluted their hunger with pride, multiplied their vision until it blurred, and mistook ritual for strength. And in Revan's vision, you see not a roadmap, but a boundary, a perimeter of mistakes wrapped in wisdom. And as you listen, you do not learn, you subtract, stripping away every layer of dogma that clings to his voice, every trace of reverence, until what remains is a single truth smoldering like coal in your chest. The dark side is not meant to be democratic, it is meant to be distilled, and from that distillation comes order, not chaos, but a sacred cycle of death and inheritance. And the rule you have carved begins to tighten, to pulse with new shape, and in that moment, surrounded by dust and ghosts, you understand that Revan never intended to be followed, he intended to be surpassed. And so you do not cling to his words, you devour them, metabolize them into something leaner, sharper. And when you rise from that chamber, the holocron flickering faintly in your grip, you are not carrying knowledge, you are carrying fire, stolen from the gods of the old Sith, and now burning in the center of your being, with a clarity so pure it no longer needs to be spoken aloud. But the temple is not finished with you, and as you walk deeper into its gut, beneath murals of betrayal and faded runes of conquest, you begin to hear other voices, softer, more broken, the remnants of Sith who came after Revan but before you, their wills fragmented into maddened circuits, each whispering a different error, a different excuse. And though they try to seduce you with grandeur, with promises of shortcuts and eternal empires, you do not bend because you see them for what they are: unconsecrated ghosts trapped in the aftermath of ambition, their legacies bloated with excess, their philosophies bloated with ego. And you strip them all away, choosing instead to walk bare through the dark, your creed growing leaner with every echo you silence, until your footsteps themselves begin to hum with purpose, and the force tightens around you not as a shroud, but as a sheath, recognizing that you are no longer its servant, you are its wielder, and what you craft with it will not be a monument, but a method, a sequence of events, passed from hand to hand in silence, a chain of successors forged through necessary death. And when you leave the temple, the holocron sealed once more, you do not look back, because you are not a disciple, you are a refinement. And the teachings you carry are not Revan's, they are yours now, reborn in the crucible of skepticism and fire, and every ghost you walked past now sleeps again. But something of you remains behind, embedded in the silence. A new whisper etched into the stone, the whisper of a rule not yet spoken aloud, but already immortal. The voices do not stop when you leave the temple, they follow you, stitched into the seams of your silence, embedded in the seams of your sleep, not as memories, but as pressure, as weight carried in the marrow of your bones. And though the holocron of Revan remains sealed, the truths it delivered are still unfolding, still echoing in chambers of your mind you had long considered empty. And it is through those echoes that you begin to realize that you are no longer just building a doctrine, you are becoming one, shedding the last remnants of self until all that remains is structure, rhythm, fire. The rule is no longer something you crafted, it is something that breathes with you, something that unfolds itself within your thoughts, like a map written in a forgotten dialect of the Force. And each step you take across barren systems, ancient, grave worlds, derelict ruins, where the wind carries whispers older than light, becomes part of its geometry, a pattern not imposed upon the galaxy, but revealed through it. And as you meditate beneath alien stars, as you study the forgotten writings of lost Sith, as you listen to the madness of trapped spirits pleading for release, you begin to understand the true heresy of your mission, that what you have birthed is not an extension of the Sith, but their correction, their reduction, their purification, and that the rule is not a continuation of darkness, but its distillation, its compression into something to lean, to fail. And in this clarity, the Force begins to respond to you differently, no longer pressing against your will, but shaping itself around it, allowing you to move through space with a silence so absolute it feels like prophecy. And yet, you know prophecy is the language of weakness, the tool of those unwilling to bend chaos into function. And so you reject it, again and again, trusting not in visions, but in patterns, not in destiny, but in architecture. And you see now that the Sith who failed were not victims of the Jedi or of war. They were victims of themselves, of their gluttony, their need to be seen, their hunger for legacy over endurance. And every time you close your eyes, you see their faces, Khan with his hollow unity, Rangyos with his fossilized power, Nihilus with his infinite hunger that could consume everything but himself. And you whisper to them, not in respect, but in warning, because the line you have created will never become them. It cannot, because it does not allow for multitude, for stagnation, for worship. It only allows for movement, for transition, for the quiet rotation of blade to throat, one to embody, one to crave, over and over, until the galaxy forgets how many there have been, only that the rule survives. And still, the holocron pulses in your mind like a dying star, leaking fragments of Revan's voice, half regret, half madness, telling you of balance, of compromise, of victory bought through surrender. And you grit your teeth against the temptation to feel pity, because pity is just sentiment draped in disguise. And the rule does not permit sentiment, it permits strength. And what you learned from Revan was not his wisdom, but his flaw, that the moment he tried to save what he should have remade, he lost the right to lead. And so you vow silently to never preserve anything that does not serve the rule, to never hesitate when the time comes to kill the next you, to never allow your apprentice to carry even a grain of your fear. And this thought guides your rituals now, your training of Zana, your construction of contingency plans and secret vaults, each one a step deeper into the lineage you are etching, not into history, but into consequence, because history is too easily forgotten, but consequence never is. And the Force remembers consequence the way a wound remembers the blade that made it. You begin crafting lessons not with words, but with absence, with denial, forcing Zana to draw strength from solitude, from conflict, from moments where you let her almost fail, because only when she chooses survival without expectation does she'll step into the shape the rule demands. And you feel pride try to creep in like a crack in your spine, but you snap it in half before it can settle, because pride is the slow poison of legacy, and the rule must be free of all such rot if it is to outlast your name. You begin speaking less, watching more, moving not as a master, but as a ghost preparing to vanish at the exact right moment. And in that withdrawal, the rule blooms within her, each day a layer peeled back, each breath she takes more independent, more silent, more precise, and though she does not yet reach for your throat, you feel her eyes measuring it, and that is correct, that is sacred. You build nothing now except opportunity. You leave trails of fragmented knowledge, shards of maps, scattered relics, false doors and true doors hidden in forgotten systems. Because you understand that one day she will look for more, and when she does, she must find the next iteration of the rule not handed to her, but hunted by her, because doctrine inherited is doctrine misunderstood, and the rule of two must never be inherited, must be seized, and in that seizing, proven. And when you return to the holocron once more, letting its voice filter through your bones one final time, you do not ask it for wisdom, you ask it to remember you, not by name, but by correction, and you seal it again, this time not in reverence, but in completion, because it has served its purpose. And now you carry something more refined than Revan's truth, something simpler, deadlier, something that does not care for philosophy or vision, only for function. And when you walk away, deeper into exile, deeper into preparation, the rule beats in your chest like a second heart, and you know that it will never die not, as long as there is someone willing to listen, not to the voices of the past, but to the silence between them, the silence you shaped into fire. The voices do not return anymore, not because they are gone, but because you have outgrown them, swallowed them whole, and stripped them to silence, their echoes now embedded within your every movement, their contradictions absorbed into the clarity of your law. And as you sit once more beneath the ashlit sky of a forgotten world, where no name has been spoken for 1,000 years, you understand that the holocrons were never meant to lead youth. They were trials in disguise, thorns sewn into the skin of the Force, to test whether you would flinch or bleed or transcend. And now that you have taken their knowledge, not as scripture, but as bone, you feel a quiet peace settle beneath your ribs, not comfort, but confirmation, because there is nothing left to seek, nothing left to answer, only the final work of quiet perpetuation, the long winding descent into legacy's fire. And you breathe slower now, not from fatigue, but from the steadiness of purpose fulfilled. You have written no manifestos, etched no symbols into monuments, left behind no armies to chant your name, because you know such things are brittle. And the rule you carry is meant to survive the collapse of temples, the corruption of teachings. The decay of Timet is not dependent on memory, only on repetition, on function. And so you teach Zana not to worship your doctrine, but to dismantle it until only the invulnerable remains. And you watch with satisfaction as she dismantles you too, piece by piece, studying your movements, dissecting your methods, breathing in your presence, not as comfort, but as equation. And in her calm dissection, you see the rule sharpening again, readying itself for the next passage, the next transformation. And you realize you no longer care what the galaxy becomes, whether the Jedi rise or fall, whether empires crumble or endure, because your concern was never conquest, was continuity. And now that the chain is in motion, forged through trial and death and hunger, it cannot be broken, not even by the ignorance of those who never knew your name. And still, in your meditations, the past flickers like faint static, the holocron's voice surfacing briefly like an old wound aching before the storm. And you feel Revan not as mentor or ghost, but as precedent, as a moment that had to fail, so that yours could succeed. And though you understand him now, deeper than ever, you no longer revere him, because the rule has shown you what he could not finish. And in that completion, you have outgrown even the need for recognition. Your legacy is not something to be honored, is something to be executed, blade to spine, breath to breath, and it will live on only if those who carry it are willing to question even you, to discard your voice when it no longer sharpens theirs. And in this, you find your greatest peace, that your apprentice may not love you, may not mourn you, may not remember you with anything but the precision of your teachings, and that is enough. That is sacred, because memory is vulnerable to distortion, but structure is not. And you have built something so lean, so unforgiving, that it cannot be compromised without collapsing entirely. And so it won't be, because the only ones who survive it will be those who deserve to, and the rest will become echoes, like the ones you silenced beneath the temple. Voices without vessels, failures speaking only to themselves. And now, in the stillness of your last days, as your body begins to hum with the quiet tremor of entropy, you prepare not for an ending, but for an offering, knowing Zana is nearly ready, her patience a blade honed on every lesson you taught, through absence, every secret you left for her to unearth. And she will come for you soon, not to punish, but to confirm. And when she does, you will not resist, because resistance would dishonor everything you built, and you will not speak, because the rule no longer requires language, it only requires action and death. And the moment her strike lands, you will dissolve not into darkness, but into lineage, into motion, into a thread that pulls forward into centuries unknown. And the holocrons will go silent forever, because your truth was not meant to be stored, it was meant to be lived again and again through hands that grasp, eyes that measure, and wills that sharpen against inevitability. And when you are gone, when your ashes drift across systems that never knew your name, the rule will remain, not carved into stone, but inscribed into consequence, into decision, into the breath of every Sith who survives the trial and becomes something more. And though they will never see your face, they will live by your fire. And through that, you are eternal, not as a voice, not as a ghost, but as the whisper that burns through the marrow of all who choose the dark, not as chaos, but as inheritance.